The cardboard boxes piled against my apartment wall felt less like storage and more like gravestones marking the death of my life as I knew it. I sat on the bare wooden floor, back pressed to the radiator's cold metal, holding the divorce papers in one hand and my phone in the other. The time blinked 3:47 p.m., barely an hour after Judge Morrison's gavel had ended 22 years of what I once believed was love. My phone buzzed. Against every shred of good sense, I looked. Veronica's name. The text preview burned into my screen before I could stop myself. Hope you enjoy your cheap little apartment, Danny. Theo just moved his grand piano into your old music room. It's worth more than your next 5 years combined. Oh, and your studio? We're making it his cigar lounge. You know, for someone who actually matters. Then another ping. A photo this time. Theo Rowland standing in my home office, my grandfather's war medals replaced by his Harvard diploma. His smug grin wasn't joy, it was victory. You'll die broke and forgotten, she wrote next. Just like your grandfather. At least he had his secrets. What do you have, Daniel? A violin and a fantasy. My hand clenched so tight around the phone I thought it might snap. I almost threw it, but then it rang. Not a text. A call. The screen showed no number, only zeros ending in a single one. I froze. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 6th, I answered. Daniel Eugene Mercer. The voice was firm, clipped, each syllable cut with military precision. Mr. Mercer, this is Colonel James Whitmore, Pentagon Estate Recovery Division. You need to listen carefully. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. The Pentagon? Your grandfather, Staff Sergeant Eugene Mercer, served under classified command in Cambodia, 1964. Operation codename, Night Music. I tried to laugh. My grandfather was a supply sergeant in Vietnam. He played piano for the officers. That's all. That was his cover, the colonel replied flatly. He was a cryptography specialist with the 5th Special Forces Group. His mission was classified for 60 years. That classification expired last night. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. I stood, legs trembling. What does this have to do with me? Everything. Your grandfather recovered something of extraordinary value in that jungle. Because of the mission's secrecy, he never claimed his compensation. Adjusted for time, inflation, and deferred defense interest, that value now totals approximately $156 million. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. The colonel's voice crackled faintly through the speaker. That's impossible, I whispered, fumbling to pick it up. He died penniless in a nursing home. My parents took loans to bury him. Staff Sergeant Mercer made a choice, Mr. Mercer. Silence in service of his country. But he left provisions. The compensation can only go to his direct descendant, if certain conditions are met. What conditions? You'll need to come to Washington immediately. A Delta ticket's waiting at O'Hare. Seat 14A, first class, your grandfather's specific request in his file. My throat went dry. How did you know to call me now, after everything? Your grandfather's words were exact. Contact my grandson the day he loses everything. That's when he'll be ready to receive what I couldn't. He's been dead 35 years, I said quietly. How could he possibly know this day? Because Eugene Mercer predicted patterns better than anyone alive, Whitmore said. That's what made him indispensable to intelligence. The question is, are you ready to finish what he started? Through my window, Lake Michigan rippled under a gray sky, the same gray as Grandpa's eyes whenever he'd stare into silence. I thought of Veronica's text, you'll die broke and forgotten. Maybe not. Colonel, I said, voice trembling, what did my grandfather recover out there? The answer came like a locked door creaking open. That question, Mr. Mercer, is worth $156 million. Be at the Pentagon tomorrow. 0800 sharp. And bring your grandfather's journal, the one with the music notes. You still have it, don't you? I turned toward the one box I hadn't unpacked, the one marked Grandpa Eugene's things in my mother's neat handwriting. Yes. I have it. Good, Whitmore said. His tone softened just a fraction. And Mr. Mercer, your ex-wife's new companion, Theo Rowland? His grandfather was a defense contractor during that same mission. Nothing about your situation is coincidence. The line went dead. I sat in the silence, the phone still warm in my palm. Chicago's skyline shimmered against the dusk, my ex-wife out there somewhere, sipping champagne in my house with a man whose bloodline might be tied to secrets my grandfather died keeping. I turned toward the box, unsealed it, and pulled out Eugene's old leather journal. Pages yellowed with age, filled with hand-scribbled music I'd practiced since childhood. For the first time, I noticed faint words penciled into the margin of the first page. For Daniel, when everything ends. 3 months before that call turned my world upside down, I stood beneath the golden lights of Chicago's Symphony Center. My violin's final note of Brahms' concerto hung in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. The audience of 2,000 rose in applause, every face beaming, except one. Veronica. She sat in the third row, her hands perfectly still in her lap. No smile. No clap. Just silence. That should have been my first warning. Life at 47 had become a metronome, every day marked by the same predictable beat. Wake at 6. Practice for 6 hours in the studio. Coffee precisely at 10. Veronica's yoga at 11. Lunch on the terrace overlooking our pool. The house itself was her masterpiece, 2 acres of glass, marble, and curated perfection in Lake Forest. Every detail screamed success. Every corner whispered distance. 15 years earlier, we'd bought it to celebrate my promotion to first chair violin at the Chicago Symphony. My mother had walked through it in tears that day, running her fingers along the marble countertops. Your grandfather would have been so proud, she'd said softly. Eugene always believed music would take you places he never could. He'd been gone 12 years by then, but his presence still haunted our family like a melody that never resolved. My father, Douglas, kept Grandpa Eugene's photo on the mantel, a young man in uniform, eyes like sharpened steel. Next to it sat his Bronze Star, though none of us knew why he'd earned it. He came back from Vietnam a different man, my father would mutter after his third beer. Spent half a year in Cambodia before his deployment even began. Never talked about it. Just played piano like he was trying to drown something out. I'd inherited his gift, but not his silence. Where he'd lived in smoky jazz clubs, improvising pain into rhythm, I'd chosen the precision of classical music, order, notation, control. Veronica said that's what drew her in. We met 23 years ago at a charity gala. I was performing, she was working for a design firm. She wore a borrowed gown and fake pearls, but her laugh, God, that laugh, was real. After the concert, she whispered, "You're not like these other men. You create something that lasts." She was 29, I was 32, and when she looked at me, I felt infinite. For the first decade, marriage felt like music itself, imperfect, yes, but harmonious. As my career grew, so did her ambition. She redecorated every apartment we moved into, turning each one into a statement of our rising success. When I finally earned tenure at the symphony, she quit her job. "I want to make our life beautiful," she'd said. And she did, at first. The shift came slowly, like a string instrument slipping out of tune. She started spending afternoons at the country club, lunches with wives of hedge fund managers, people who measured worth in jets and lake houses. "Did you know Roland Ashford just bought a Basquiat?" she'd say absently while scrolling her phone. 23 million for a painting. I remember the name clearly, Roland Ashford. The man who would eventually dismantle everything. He'd hired Veronica's firm to redesign his Lincoln Park penthouse. She accepted the project without asking me. "It's just work," she'd said. "His money spends the same as anyone's." But it didn't. His money came wrapped in admiration and comparison, 2 things my wife craved. Roland was 6'2", Harvard MBA, and made 40 million last year. I was 5'9", Juilliard trained, scraping by on 300,000. At a dinner party we couldn't avoid, Roland had placed his hand on Veronica's shoulder and said, "Your husband's an artist, right? That must be interesting." He said, "Artist, the way some people say, amateur." Veronica laughed. Really laughed. The sound twisted something inside me. That was 6 months before Vienna, the tour that should have been my triumph but became my undoing. I was halfway through rehearsing Mozart at the Musikverein when my nephew James FaceTimed me from Chicago. His face was pale, his voice shaking. "Uncle Dan. I saw Aunt Veronica tonight. She was at Roland's office, but it was midnight. They were..." He swallowed hard. "They weren't working." The photos came seconds later, Roland and Veronica on his balcony, her red dress half unzipped, the Chicago skyline glittering like a cruel witness behind them. I stared at those images until dawn. At 11:47 p.m., she'd texted me, "Going to bed early. Headache." That night, I performed flawlessly, every note perfect, every emotion gone. The critics called it, technically brilliant but emotionally cold. They had no idea how right they were. 3 days later, I walked into our Lake Forest kitchen. Veronica was humming Vivaldi's Spring, wearing new diamond earrings I didn't recognize. "Nice earrings," I said. She touched them lightly. "Gift from Roland. A thank you for the project." "Generous man," I said quietly. "Working till midnight now, are we?" Her eyes flashed, then cooled. "You know, I wasn't going to insult you by denying it." "How noble," I said bitterly. "You want an apology? Fine. I'm sorry you found out. But I'm not sorry it happened." She took a slow sip of coffee. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who loves dead composers more than living people? Roland makes me feel alive. Alive? I laughed. You threw away 22 years for lunch in Monaco? No. I threw it away for someone who matters. Her words sliced deeper than any betrayal could. The difference between you and Roland, she continued. When he walks into a room, people notice. When you walk in, they clap politely and forget. You're a relic, Daniel. A museum piece playing songs by men who've been dead for centuries. The divorce came fast. Her father's golf partner was her lawyer. Illinois law favored her, of course, the non-working spouse. She got the house, the accounts, alimony. You can keep your violin, her lawyer said kindly. And one car. My mother cried. My father just sighed. Eugene lost everything too, he said. Came home from the war to find his wife gone and the farm sold. He died broke, but with dignity. Sometimes, son, that's all a man can keep. The Pentagon rose from the Virginia morning haze like a monument to secrets, its stone walls catching the first rays of sun with almost divine indifference. I'd taken the red-eye from Chicago, clutching my grandfather's old journal wrapped in a towel in my backpack. I couldn't bear to let it out of my sight. The Uber driver, an ex-Marine judging by the tattoo on his forearm, raised an eyebrow when I gave him the destination. Pentagon, huh? You military? My grandfather was, I said quietly. Then you must be someone important to get a summons there. If only he knew. I'd spent the entire flight studying Eugene Mercer's journal, the same one I'd kept boxed away for decades. It was more than sheet music, it was math disguised as melody. The dates above each composition matched major military operations in Southeast Asia, and the tiny symbols in the margins weren't notes at all. They were ciphers. Colonel James Whitmore met me just past security. He was younger than his voice had sounded, maybe 50, but with the posture of a man who'd never once questioned authority. Mr. Mercer, he greeted, shaking my hand with firm precision. Before we proceed, I need to confirm your identity. Not with paperwork, with memory. His tone made me straighten. Tell me about your grandfather's piano. It was a 1947 Baldwin Spinet, mahogany, cigarette burn right on middle C, I said, almost smiling. He bought it from a pawn shop in Raleigh. Whitmore's expression softened just a fraction. And what did he call his Sunday night sessions at the veterans' home? Church for the unchurched, I said. He believed music was the only religion that never lied. The colonel nodded. Good. Follow me. We went 3 floors underground, each checkpoint more serious than the last, ID scan, biometric scan, retinal scan. At the end of a narrow corridor, a vault door hissed open, revealing a sterile room lined with file boxes. Your grandfather's real record, Whitmore said, resting a hand on one of them. Most of what you thought you knew was a fabrication. Staff Sergeant Mercer was part of a Black Ops cryptography mission known as Operation Night Music. He slid a photo across the table. My grandfather, young, wiry, sharp-eyed, stood beside a group of soldiers in jungle fatigues. Their faces were blurred, censored by black bars. Behind them, the wreckage of a small plane. February, 1964, Whitmore continued. Officially, that plane didn't exist. Neither did your grandfather's unit. What were they doing there? They were sent to retrieve something from a downed Soviet aircraft, a prototype encryption computer and its pilot, a man named Viktor Klov. The pilot survived long enough to give your grandfather critical information. Whitmore produced another file, its pages marked with redacted black lines like scars. Klov provided a list of Swiss bank accounts used to funnel payments between American defense contractors and Soviet intelligence. Account numbers, passwords, the works. My mouth went dry. And my grandfather? He memorized them, Whitmore said. Then turned over the briefcase and kept silent for the rest of his life. The total worth of those accounts in 1964 was $22 million. Can you imagine what that's worth now? He could have claimed it, I murmured. He could have made our family rich. But claiming it would have exposed the mission, Whitmore said flatly. He chose silence, and left everything coded in his music. The colonel opened a final folder. The Department of Defense owed your grandfather compensation for that operation, but the claim was sealed along with his mission. With 6 decades of interest and statutory multipliers, that total now stands at $156 million. But he left conditions for release. He handed me an envelope, my name written in Eugene's shaky handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The letter smelled faintly of dust and old ink. The first line read, Daniel, if you're reading this, you've already lost everything you thought mattered. I know because patterns repeat through generations. You love completely, and so your pain runs deep. What I left behind is not just music, it's a map. I read on. Eugene explained that each piece of his music contained coordinates. Each rhythm change represented a sequence. Hidden within one of those coordinates, Baltimore Storage Unit 447, lay the secret he couldn't destroy. The Pentagon money, he wrote, was mine no matter what. But if I chose to open that unit, I'd be choosing truth over comfort. The Swiss accounts still exist, the letter continued. The money may be clean by time but not by origin. The names attached to it built empires on blood. One of them will matter to you personally. I glanced up at Whitmore. How long do I have? 72 hours from my call, he said. After that, everything transfers to defense. The letter ended with, you'll have the power to correct history or preserve its lies. Choose wisely. Music, like truth, echoes through time. I folded the letter slowly. What's in that storage unit, Colonel? He didn't answer. He simply said, what your grandfather couldn't say out loud. When I finally stepped outside, dawn had turned the sky pale gold. The Pentagon's shadow stretched long across the asphalt. I looked down at my grandfather's journal in my hands and whispered, what did you hide, old man? The wind carried no answer, just the faint hum of morning traffic, as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. The Baltimore storage facility sat on a forgotten corner of the industrial district, its brick facade choked by ivy and time. A faded sign above the entrance read Harbor Lock and Safe, the paint flaking like old memories. It looked abandoned, exactly the kind of place that could hold a secret for 60 years. The keypad at the door still worked. I entered the code hidden in my grandfather's autumn fugue, 19640-228, February 28, 1964, the date of his mission. The green light flickered once before the latch clicked open. Unit 447 waited at the end of a narrow corridor that smelled like dust and rusted hinges. My pulse thudded in my ears as I turned the key. The lock slid open as if it had been expecting me. Inside stood a single metal filing cabinet and, on top of it, a chessboard mid-game. I recognized the layout instantly. The Budapest Gambit. My grandfather had taught me that move when I was 8. Sometimes you have to sacrifice material to gain position, he'd said. That's how you win the long game. Inside the top drawer was a small envelope holding a safety deposit key marked Baltimore First National Bank. Beneath it, a stack of documents bound in faded twine. The first page stopped me cold. Photocopies of Swiss bank statements, dated between 1964 and 1970. Each one detailed deposits from American defense contractors to Soviet accounts. The sums were staggering. But it was the names that made my hands tremble. Ashford Industries. 17 separate transactions. Rowland's family. My vision blurred as I read further. William Ashford, his grandfather, had sold defective helicopter parts to the Army, knowing full well the parts were faulty. Dozens of pilots had died in crashes caused by those failures. The profits, 43% margins. The bribes, laundered through Switzerland. The blood money totaled $22 million. My phone rang, startling me. An unknown number. Mr. Mercer, the voice said smoothly. It was Rowland. How do you even know I'm here? I demanded. The same way I knew your wife was vulnerable, he replied. My family's been watching yours since 1964. Your grandfather stole evidence that belonged to us, stole what he didn't understand. My grandfather was a soldier, I said sharply. He documented crimes your family committed. Rowland chuckled. He was a thief who took what wasn't his. That briefcase was meant for the Department of Defense. But you already know that. I'm offering you what he never took, safety. Safety? Yes. Take the Pentagon inheritance and walk away. Leave the documents. You'll be richer than you ever dreamed. Or, chase the truth and lose everything, like your grandfather did. So that's your threat? It's a choice, he said coldly. Silence or ruin. Eugene chose silence. Be smarter than he was. The line went dead. I stood there in the half-light, heart hammering. My grandfather's words echoed in my head, you'll have the power to correct history or preserve its lies. I took a slow breath and called my cousin, Dennis, a journalist who'd spent years chasing government corruption. Dennis, I said, voice steady. Cancel your plans. I've got the story that'll define your career. 2 hours later, we stood inside Baltimore First National Bank. The vault doors opened with the deliberate weight of history. The safety deposit box matched the key perfectly. Inside, I found the originals of every document from the storage unit, plus 2 reel-to-reel tapes labeled Clove Confession. There were also ledgers showing where the Swiss funds went after 1970. The money hadn't vanished, it had evolved. Passed from William Ashford to his son, then finally to Rowland in 2010. At the bottom of the box was something else, a single sheet of handwritten music titled Redemption Suite. I hummed the melody under my breath, and suddenly it clicked. The notes weren't just music, they were numbers. Account passwords, hidden inside rhythm and pitch. My grandfather hadn't only documented corruption, he'd kept access to the money itself. Dennis stared at me, eyes wide. Dan, if this is real, it's going to burn down an empire. It's real, I said quietly. And it's time someone struck the match. For the next 24 hours, Dennis and a team of forensic accountants from his paper combed through every detail. The Swiss banks confirmed it all. The accounts were active. The current balance? $87 million, clean by law, dirty by legacy. What do we do? Dennis asked. You could take this money and vanish. Or we could expose them. I looked down at the sheet music, my grandfather's name signed at the bottom like a ghost's approval. We publish, I said. But the money goes to the families of the soldiers who died in those crashes. Every cent. Dennis nodded slowly. Your grandfather would be proud. Maybe, I murmured. Or maybe he'd say I'm the fool who finally played his unfinished song. The Washington Post headline hit on a quiet Tuesday morning. Blood money, how defense contractor fraud funded the enemy. By noon, Ashford Industries stock had fallen 40%. By evening, Roland Ashford's smug face filled every news channel, the words federal investigation crawling beneath him. I watched the chaos unfold from my new office, a modest brownstone in Lincoln Park that now housed the Eugene Mercer Foundation for Veterans Families. The $156 million Pentagon inheritance had cleared the week before, clean, legal, and irrevocably mine. But it didn't feel like victory. Every time I looked at the framed photos of young soldiers, boys barely 20 who died in Ashford-supplied helicopters, I remembered what my grandfather wrote, music, like truth, echoes through time. Veronica called 17 times that first day. On the 18th, I finally answered. Daniel, her voice cracked. They took everything. Roland's arrested. The FBI seized our accounts, the house, even my car. I have nothing. I stared out the window at the city skyline. You have what you chose. I made a mistake, she sobbed. He used me, just like his grandfather used those soldiers. I'm staying with my sister in Naperville. In her basement. Her words landed heavy, but not painful anymore. What do you want, Veronica? I want to come home. I almost laughed. That house isn't your home anymore. The bank foreclosed when his assets froze. I bought it at auction. You bought our house, she whispered. I bought a house, I corrected. My uncle and aunt live there now. They lost theirs to medical debt. Figured they deserved something peaceful more than Roland needed a cigar lounge. She began crying, real, raw tears this time. What am I supposed to do now? The same thing I did, I said softly. Start over. The only difference is, you chose your ending. Mine was chosen for me. When the call ended, I sat in silence, the city hum filling the space where her voice had been. 6 months later, I stood once again beneath the chandeliers of Symphony Center. My bow hovered above the strings, ready to perform Redemption Suite, the composition my grandfather left unfinished. The audience didn't know that what they were about to hear contained history encrypted in harmony, each note a name, each rhythm a confession. As the first movement began, I saw my mother in the front row, tears glinting under the lights. She wept hardest during the Adagio, the section that carried the coded names of the soldiers who died in Ashford's helicopters. By the time the final chord faded, the entire hall was silent. Then came the applause, thunderous, unstoppable. Dennis won a Pulitzer for the investigation. The Foundation's trust had already distributed $12 million to Gold Star families. Ashford Industries declared bankruptcy amid class action lawsuits. Roland got 7 years for tax evasion, the only crime they could still prosecute. Veronica remarried 2 years later, to her divorce lawyer, ironically. A practical choice for a woman who'd finally learned to value stability over passion. My sister Monica once asked if I regretted it. Which part? I'd said. Exposing Roland or losing Veronica? Either. I smiled faintly. Eugene didn't have a choice. I did. He planted the truth like seeds. I just happened to be the one alive when they bloomed. The real inheritance wasn't money, it was clarity. Understanding that Eugene's silence hadn't been weakness, but patience. He'd set the board decades before, waiting for someone to make the final move. Today, I live quietly. A 2-bedroom condo near Symphony Hall. I still practice 6 hours a day. But on weekends, I teach free violin lessons to veterans' kids. The foundation funds music therapy at VA hospitals, programs inspired by Eugene's belief that sound heals what words cannot. Sometimes I visit nursing homes, just like he did, and play Moonlight Serenade. Most never notice the faint Morse code woven into the rhythm, but once in a while, an old veteran looks up sharply and whispers, "Night music, you know about night music." I nod every time. My grandfather knew, I say. He made sure someone would remember. Because inheritance isn't just about money. It's about memory, the stories we protect, the choices we make with what we're given, and the courage to play the hardest notes even when our hands shake. Eugene Mercer left me more than millions. He left me proof that justice might take 60 years to arrive, but when it finally does, it sings, encoded in time, waiting for someone brave enough to play the truth aloud. And that, I've learned, was worth everything I lost to find it. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and share it with someone who believes justice has its own rhythm. Comment below if you've ever uncovered a truth your family kept hidden. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the past finally speaks.